In the Spanish colonies, state and church worked together to establish an authoritarian rule over the colonists. The Spanish Inquisition acted as an intimidating police force to hold unruly colonists in check. Catholic authorities put a lot of effort to stamp out all opposition to the power structure led by monarchy in Spain. The church's job in the colonies was to keep the elites in power. When the colonies in North America gained independence, fear arises that people's movements could take over control in the colonies. The Spanish were already dependent on economically. Therefore, the mother country ruled its colonies in an iron fist, trying to keep the people down. Throughout the existence of the Mexican colony, wealth had been increasing drastically for the power, but the rigid social system in the colonies, as said enforced by the powerful bond between church and state, prevented the majority of people from rising up in their social class or gaining any wealth. The peasants that made the wealth of the rich possible were working in caves deep down, mining silver, and lived under horrendous conditions, cut off the rest of the civilization. Ironically, it would be a Catholic priest that would be inspiring the enslaved Mexican people to rise up against the oppressive rule by the state that was enforced by Catholic Church. On September 10th, 1810, priest Hidalgo launched a 10-year struggle that would transform Mexico. First, a handful of rebels called together by now famous Grito de Dolores speech marched, heading to the capital of the colony. On the way, more and more people joined the movement that eventually reached a size of multiple tens of thousands. However, even though large in size, the ill-equipped army was defeated by Spanish troops, and Hidalgo fled into the mountains. Just a few days later, he was captured and executed. Many other peasants leaders, such as Maria Morales Pavon, Mariano Matamoros, and Vincent Guerrero had the same fate. A debate between two historians will now further discuss the role of Hidalgo in the Mexican independence movement.
As the Mexican caravan is approaching and getting closer and closer to our border every day, it is time to ask ourselves what these immigrants want in our country and why they are fleeing from their beloved Mexico. Do they want to set the idea of revolution into the minds of young Mexican Americans? To investigate in the dangers of a Mexican revolution here and the united greatness of America, ladies and gentlemen, we will now have historian David Peters join us today to talk to us about the Mexican revolutions in the past and see if back then too it was a Mexican caravan approaching the border of Mexico. Mr. Peters, good morning.
Good morning.
So tell us a bit about the Mexican Revolution.
Sure. So first of all, let me clear this up. The Mexican Revolution did not begin with the caravan marching into another country. Rather,
It did.
No, actually it all started with Father Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla. He was a Creole-born Mexican who was part of a larger conspiracy to overthrow the Spanish colonial rule in Mexico. Unfortunately, the conspiracy was uncovered and most of the conspirators were executed. Hidalgo, however, managed to escape, and after holding the famous Cry of Dolores speech, he had an army of other revolutionary-thinking lower-class oppressed Mexicans who wanted to overthrow the Spanish government and achieve independence. Hidalgo, despite being part of the ruling class, fought for the independence in the name of the poor and oppressed. He then, with this army, marched to the capital of his own country to expel the oppressors from Spain.
That sure is a funny little interpretation of what happened there in Mexico. We actually have another historian who will tell us his very version of the story. Mr. William Power, can you hear us?
Yes, loud and clear.
Very good. So why don't you go ahead and comment a bit on what Mr. Peters said?
Yes, well, first of all, that story is the biggest load of bullcrap I have ever heard in all of my professional career as an Ivy League historian professor. Hidalgo's army, as you so falsely called it, was in fact a caravan of poor people who were simply also trying to start a revolution. And while we are talking about Hidalgo, he was the absolutely worstest and baddest and evilest leftist communist Democrat that I've ever seen in my life. That man had 4 wives and 9 children, even though he swore on the oath of a priest to our Lord. His army slaughtered, raped, and murdered dozens, if not millions, of decent folks that lived their lives peacefully, not ever wanting anyone to overthrow any government. So there you go, Miss Ingram, another leftist snowflake debunked. That's because facts don't care about your feelings, Mr. Peters.
What the?
Even though the independence movement started by a priest fighting for the poor and oppressed, it was the Creoles, the elites of Mexican colony, that many years later would continue the struggle for independence. The reason for that was that in 1820 a liberal government came into power in Spain, making Creoles fearful of losing the privilege they had in the colonies. Then, in 1821, Agustin de Iturbin, the leader of the royalist forces, negotiated the plan of Iguala, under which Mexico would become an independent monarchy that maintains the power of church and of the Creoles. So it could be said that independence was not really achieved for Mexico, as merely it was a different government oppressing them. To the Creoles, however, the fight for their independence was a fight to protect their privilege from being taken away by liberal monarchy. That would establish at least some form of social and economic equality for the lower class. Iturbide eventually defeated all of the independence opposing royalists along with the Spanish monarchy, which low on funds gave up the fight for their colony. On August 24, 1821, Spanish Viceroy Juan de Onuji signed the Treaty of Cordoba, which approved the plan to make Mexico an independent constitutional monarchy, and made Iturbide Alegre the Emperor of Mexico. However, as said, for the peasants not much was achieved, which eventually could bring them to rise up again against the Mexican Creoles that were now in power.